Okay, and very thankful to Ray for doing that, making that available. Okay, well tonight we're going to start with a brief look at the geography of the region that where the Bible is set, the region that the Bible came out of. There is a little bit of summary type of information on page 23 in your notebook, but more to the point, there are maps in the back. So I'll suggest that you open up, so the first blue page separates the main part of the notebook from the appendix material, and after the online resources and the glossary, there is the timeline, which we looked at last week, and then there's several maps. And I'm going to walk you through each of these maps so you gain some familiarity with them, and then they will be available to you as a resource for later. So it's on the page following the timeline is where the maps start. As we go through this, there's going to be a little bit of a historical review as well to reinforce some of what Ray shared last time with the Jewish history, because the history and geography are tied together. You know, the events happened in a place. So Neva and Mike, turn one page and to the first map.
Okay.
All right. So I just want to mention that this is really going to be a fast overview. Alaric was mentioning before we got started, we have a history and geography overview class. This is a 3-week class. This will be less material than that. If a little bit of an expansion is something that you would find interesting, we're going to have on the last night, the last thing you do before you get out of here, we hold the snacks hostage, and you can't have them until you do an evaluation. Okay, so we'll be handing that out, and anything, history and geography, anything that we have covered in this class that you would like to see done in more depth, please let us know, because we take the input from the students that come, and that directly affects the decisions on what classes we offer, all that kind of stuff. So we bring back classes that have, people have expressed interest in. We do some new ones, so forth. So anyway, this is just going to be an overview. Our goal is basic familiarity with the region. So the first map, you should be looking at one that looks a lot like the one on this wall here. This is the Mediterranean area today. So the Mediterranean area is the region where Bible events happened. So you've got Italy here, Greece here. This is modern Turkey. Israel is over here. That's the Jewish people. That's their home. So the eastern end of the Mediterranean. Northern Africa is here with Egypt, right here off the page. Some of the events that we're going to look or talk about happen further off, right? So we've got some of the maps in the book will show further to the east, right? I couldn't find one that had all of this and all of that, so had to stick with what we had. But so this is the area that we're talking about, the Eastern Mediterranean, and both Old and New Testaments have lots going on here, plus a little bit further east, as we'll see. The patriarch's world is the Fertile Crescent. Your version of this is a little bit simplified from the one that's on the screen. Do not worry about the text that you can't read because it's too small. It's not important for what we're doing here. It's very similar to this map over here. So this one does include territory further east. As you can see, this is the Eastern Mediterranean, Israel here, and today this is Iraq, and this is Iran over here. Okay, so Abraham came from Ur, which is down here, but would now be southern Iraq, and he migrated up and across the Fertile Crescent. Okay, so on this map, same things here. There's a little bit of extra stuff on here too. So Ur of the Chaldeans, right down in what's now southern Iraq, and he migrated up here to Haran, and then down into the land where God told him to go. So this is the Fertile Crescent, and he basically traveled the whole Fertile Crescent. In between, the reason you don't do a straight line is this is all desert. Was then, still is. So very inhospitable. So that's why this is called the Fertile Crescent. In Joseph's time, as Ray described, the whole family which was living here, they all migrated into Egypt, and they lived in Egypt for a long time. Then under Moses, they left. They wandered in the wilderness, which is this area in here, and then they came up around on the east side. This is the Dead Sea here, and the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River between them. They came around and crossed over the Jordan River to get into the land. So that's the early history of Israel. When they entered the land, moving to our next slide, God told them to cast lots for which territory would belong to which tribe. You remember we have the 12 tribes of Israel, named for the 12 sons of Jacob. And you can see the names that are in capital letters are the names of the tribes. Okay, so you got Simeon down here in the south. Judah has this whole big area. Reuben, Gad, Manasseh, Issachar, part of Manasseh is over here, so forth. So the different tribes, they all had allocations in the land. They were supposed to operate as one people, but they were in fact 12 tribal groups, and so they had tribal leadership as well, and that was fine with God. What was supposed to happen was that when they came in, so they came around from the south, and they came around to the east, and they crossed the Jordan. You remember the story about Jericho probably, right? So that was the first thing. And what God told them was that they were to conquer the people who were the inhabitants of the land. I was actually just reading today in Deuteronomy chapter 9 where Moses recaps and he says it's because these people are so evil. That's why you must get rid of them. He had told Abraham 4 centuries earlier, he said, I'm going to give you this land, but the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. So, he said he was going to give them a long time to shape up. Well, they never shaped up. So now it's time for God's judgment on these people who are evil. And the instrument of God's judgment was to be the people of Israel. They were to execute his judgment. Drive these people out. And in fact, they were told to, anyone that didn't leave, that they were told to kill them. And this is the God of judgment at work.
What was their name?
Sorry?
The evil people? What?
Well, there were 7 nations.
Okay.
Jebusites, Hittites, Hivites, Girgashites, Amorites, Amalekites. Your assignment for next week. By the way, what does Pentateuch mean?
Well, the first 4 books of, 5 books.
Right, 5 volumes, right? So that was your assignment. I'm sorry, we don't really want to pick on you, but these people were judged by God to be unworthy of continuing as nations.
So women and children too?
Women and children too. So there comes a point where the whole culture is spoiled, and it's going nowhere except into evil. And when a culture gets that, we see it with the flood, we see it with Sodom and Gomorrah, we see it here, we saw it in Egypt with the plagues, when God determines that there is no hope of anything more coming out of this, then he removes it.
So that's kind of what's happening now. in the
It's gonna
world.
happen again, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
2 Peter 3, if you want a Bible reference for that, it's gonna happen again. It's gonna be removed. God's gonna do what he did with the flood, again, but not with water this time. So anyway, they were all, they had these territories allocated to them. They were supposed to conquer the people, drive them out. Any that wouldn't leave, to get rid of them, and they didn't. Over and over and over again in the wilderness, they failed to obey. Well, the same pattern continued. So Joshua was the leader that led them in, and he led the conquest of this whole big central part. So it was pretty well conquered, but the rest of it, not. And the people just failed to drive those people out. And they chose instead to live among the Canaanites. And it created problems for them, just endless problems. Until much later, finally all those nations were destroyed by other people because the Israelites didn't do it. Well, the monarchy began 400 years after the conquest. So they came in, they conquered the land, sort of semi-conquered it, and lived among the Canaanites. And the time of the judges, they didn't have a king, but then they demanded a king. The monarchy began 400 years later. Saul, David, and Solomon were the rulers of the united monarchy, and then the kingdom was divided. So Judah, which included actually Simeon, whose territory was kind of scattered throughout southern Judah, and also Benjamin up here, were part of the southern kingdom, which took the name Judah after the primary tribe. The northern kingdom kept the name Israel. And Ray took us through that. There were two worship centers. I'm going to, instead of pointing with my hand, I'm going to use my little thing. So Jerusalem is right here. Jeroboam set up the worship of an idol, a golden calf, here in Bethel, and another one way up north in Dan. But you can see these two worship centers were very close together. And there was just there was a border area between them, but they were very close to each other. But they couldn't have been farther apart in God's eyes. Well, as Ray described last week, the empires came along. God sent the Assyrian Empire to remove the northern kingdom of Israel. And so this slide now and the map, so we're a few pages in, if you're following along. This shows the boundaries approximately of several ancient empires. And the first one to talk about is this dot dash line. So that goes around here. That is the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrian Empire's capital was Nineveh, up here in what's now northern Iraq. And they conquered all this territory. They took away the northern kingdom of Israel, and they invaded Judah. And they actually took a number of the cities of Judah, but they could never conquer Jerusalem. And so Judah remained independent of the Assyrian Empire. Sort of this little independent thorn sticking right into them, in Judah. Well, the Assyrian Empire was conquered and replaced by the Babylonian Empire. That's this line. So the Babylonian Empire, you can see, is a little bit smaller, actually, in extent. Its center was Babylon. The capital of it was Babylon in southern Iraq today. And so they conquered Nineveh, which was the city of the north, the leading city of the north. And they established that was Nebuchadnezzar, so that name may be familiar to you. The Babylonians then conquered Judah. This was at God's direction. conquered Judah and took them into captivity. So the people were taken to captivity over in the area of Babylon for 70 years, and then they were allowed to come back. That was under the next empire, which was the Persian Empire, which is this line. So this thing, it goes way further east. This is Persia, modern-day Iran. Their capital is in Susa. Went way over to India. You know, it extended that far. And you can see the huge extent. This was a massive empire, enormous. Cyrus was the first emperor, and he's the one that decreed the Jews can go back home. So he sent them back, let them rebuild the temple, rebuild the walls. Actually, the walls were built a little later after Cyrus. Cyrus was the one that said they could rebuild the temple. Well, let me look at my notes and see what I've forgotten. Just to say, if you ever hear the term the return, especially with a capital R, the return is the return from Babylon to the land. So there's the conquest, that's when Joshua leads them in. There's the captivity when they leave. There's the return is when they come back. Those are kind of key points in Israel's history, and they're usually spelled with capital letters. It's my
Further to the east, is that mostly desert, or there's some
No.
cities there?
No, it's settled area. Let's see, we've got a globe in here. Let me get it. Right back. All right, I don't know how visible this is going to be. Mike gets to look at it because he asked the question. So here is Iraq, and Iran actually extends. Iran is quite mountainous. It extends quite a ways to the east, and then Afghanistan. In the news a lot. Borders right on there. Also Pakistan. Okay, the Himalayas are right in here, right? So this is very mountainous. Yes, that's the area farther east. And the Persian Empire included a lot of that territory, as well as way west. So it was huge, a huge empire. The Greek Empire, as we will see shortly, was even bigger. So it was enormous.
I wonder how they were able to keep that much land, because how many people?
Well, the
did
Greeks
that?
didn't. Actually, none of them did, right? They all got conquered by
Yeah.
the next one in line, right? And then they all had to put down revolts. That, it's
Yeah.
not easy to maintain a huge empire like that. So under the Persians is where the Old Testament concludes, right? So they're still under the control of the Persian Empire, and the Old Testament comes to an end. And then what happens is that the Greeks, Alexander the Great, conquers really all of the Persian Empire, because he went all the way into India, way, way, way far east, and he started out in Greece here, so it obviously included all of Greece. So big, massive empire, and it divided. After Alexander died, they couldn't keep it together, and so they divided it up into 4 parts which were handed out to the 4 generals, the 4 primary generals that Alexander had. And the one that got the southern part down here in Egypt was called Ptolemy, and the one that got the northern part up here in what's now Syria and northern Iraq, that was called Seleucus, was his name. So there was a Seleucid Empire and a Ptolemaic Empire, and they fought each other all the time, and the battleground was Israel. And they got handed back and forth all the time. This is between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Now this is going on. You may have heard of the Maccabees. The Maccabees revolted against it, but eventually the northern ones won out, and they conquered. The Maccabees revolted against them and set up a semi-autonomous, arrangement where they pretty much governed themselves. Well, then the Greek Empire, of course, fell to the Roman Empire. So here is a map of the Roman Empire. You can see it goes much farther west, much farther north. It includes more of Africa, but it included less to the east. Okay, so the Parthian Empire owned a lot of the eastern, formerly Greek Empire. So, this is the area of the Roman Empire. This actually, the date of this particular map, or what it's trying to depict, is a little after the time of the New Testament, because they were actually still growing. So this is the Roman Empire at its greatest extent. You can see it goes all the way up in much of Britain, all of southern Europe, most of Europe. Just a huge empire, and that is who's in charge when Jesus is born and the New Testament starts. Jesus was born, once again, here's Judea. Okay, zoom in on that, blow it up. That's what we've got here. So up at the top, you'll see Galilee, right? The province of Galilee. That's where Jesus grew up. He was born in Bethlehem, which is right near Jerusalem, which is in Judea. So Judea and Galilee are the primary areas in which Jesus worked. In between them is Samaria. Samaria was populated by a mixed people, a mixture of Jews and Gentiles that the Assyrians had brought in. They had a mixed religion as well. The Jews despised them, but Jesus worked with them. So he spent a little bit of time in Samaria, which is between Judea and Galilee. He also spent a little bit of time in Perea, which is across the Jordan. And he spent a little bit of time north of Galilee, up in the Phoenicia area. But primarily he was in Galilee. Nazareth is there, Capernaum is there, and he was in Judea and spent a lot of time in Jerusalem.
How many miles is that, do you think?
Well, there's a scale of miles there
Oh, yeah.
down at the bottom, so I'll let you measure that out.
Okay,
Sorry.
okay.
So that's assignment number 2. Sorry. I really don't want to discourage questions. I shouldn't do this.
Everybody else is gonna get mad pretty soon and say, well, I want an assignment.
Anybody that wants an assignment, Ray will be happy to give you one.
Yeah.
So this is the area of Jesus' ministry. When he died and rose and ascended to heaven, his followers, the apostles, started preaching in Jerusalem. They quickly expanded to include Samaria, the coastal areas, Galilee, and then they really got going beyond. And here's a map that just shows Paul's third journey. He made 3 missionary journeys and then a final journey as a prisoner to Rome. So once again, just to orient, here's Judea. So now we've zoomed way back out again. We're looking at the whole Mediterranean, the whole eastern Mediterranean. So from Judea, they went up to Antioch. So that's way up here in the northeast corner of the Mediterranean. This is a kind of a busy map. It's a little bit hard to figure out what's water and what's land. So it takes a little bit of looking at. This is the island of Cyprus. This is what's currently is Turkey today. So this map shows Paul's third journey, in which he goes over here. He's working in western Turkey. He goes up into Macedonia, which we would call northern Greece now, and then down into Greece proper. That was the area of the Apostle Paul's work. Eventually, he goes to Rome in Italy. But the gospel is spreading from the apostles all through the Roman Empire and beyond. We don't have a record in the Bible, but the historical records suggest that Thomas, for instance, went to India and preached there, and there were other apostles that went beyond actually the borders of the Roman Empire. And our final bit for the geography overview is just to take a look at Israel today. So the borders you can see of Israel, her neighbors are Egypt, still where it always has been, Jordan to the east, Syria to the northeast, Lebanon to the north, Iraq is on the other side of Jordan, Saudi Arabia wraps around here. So that's the neighbors. Once again, Ray described the modern situation with a lot of conflict with the Arab neighbors. So in 1967, Israel captured what's now called the West Bank, which is this area, that shaded area. Also the Gaza Strip, which is down here along the coast, and the Golan Heights, which are up here on the border with Syria. So those are considered by international standards to be occupied territories. Parts of them have been actually annexed by Israel. But the Palestinians live in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and they desire their own nation. And that's, you read about this and then hear about it on the news. So this is the geography of that area.
Do we know what percentage of Iraq is left?
Is left?
Yeah. After are we still bombing them?
Oh, no, the war between the United States and Iraq has concluded. I mean, they still have violence going on there, but no war with the United States anymore.
Okay.
All right, it's time to hand off.
Okay. Turn your papers over, we're gonna have a quiz on everything Paul just talked about. Good luck with that.
I gotta go.
Yeah, I do too. I couldn't keep up with all that. A lot of information there, but a lot of good information. And actually, some of the stuff that Paul talked about is stuff that we talked about last week. Some of the stuff I'm going to talk about now dovetails very nicely because Paul's talked about history and geography, and now we're going to talk about the first thing we're going to talk about in my section is the books of the Bible, an overview, and it will dovetail with a lot of what we just talked about. So hopefully that will reinforce some of the things you just heard. So when the quiz does come, you'll be ready, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to do our books of the Bible overview. Last week we left David as an old man. First week our book of the Bible overview is Genesis. Then last week we did the Israelites coming out of Egypt. So we did, was it 11 books of the Bible I believe we did last time? And, cover them coming out of Egypt and going up through the reign of David. So this week we're going to cover a period of about 300 years. David's son Solomon is where we're going to start. And then we're going to talk about some of the things Paul talked about with the divided kingdom and then the exile, and then we're going to jump on into some other the books, history, wisdom, and prophecy, which all fit into the same time, this 300-year time period. So that's what we're going to look at here tonight in this section. So we're going to start with Kings and Chronicles, actually page 24 in your notebook, and there's a lot of information in your notebook. So I'm really going to sort of skim over it fairly quickly to give you an overview, but you can go back and look through this because, like I said, there's a whole lot of information starting on page 24 in your notebook. But 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles are historical books. So we're going to look at, like I said, different types of books, history, geography, poetry, prophecy, those different types of books. These 4 books are specifically history books and giving us the history of this certain time and period. They actually, those 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles run parallel times. But they're not just a repeat of each other. They actually fill in details that one has and the other doesn't, then the other has and the first one doesn't. So it all sort of dovetails very nicely together. It gives us information that we don't get in just one set of the books or in the other set of the books. So we have David's son Solomon. David dies and his son Solomon becomes the next king. Solomon was noted for his wisdom and his wealth, and also a peace during his reign. So this is Solomon's legacy, as it were. So you ask somebody today, tell me a few things about Solomon. First thing most people will say, they'll talk about his wisdom. He asked for wisdom, he asked God for wisdom, and he got it. God gave him that wisdom. In 1 Kings chapter 3, there's a verse that talks about sort of the start of Solomon's life. It says, Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father. I mean, wouldn't that be a nice thing to have on your tombstone? You know, that's how his life started. Loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father. He built a great temple for God's glory. He wanted to give God the glory, so he built this temple. You'll hear of Solomon's temple. This is when it happened, Solomon's temple. Solomon also, as we talked about his wisdom, he wrote books of wisdom. He wrote the book of Proverbs, or much of the book of Proverbs. Some material in Proverbs might be from David. There's maybe some other writers in there. The thought is that Hezekiah, King Hezekiah, who we'll talk about in a little bit, probably organized the book of Proverbs. But it was Solomon who is the main writer in the Proverbs. He also wrote Ecclesiastes, another wisdom book. And, you know, in there, it says on the screen, his sort of answer to life was, life is worthless. If this is all there is, you know, that's it. But the only satisfaction, his conclusion, and I believe it's Ecclesiastes 12, his conclusion in the book of Ecclesiastes, that the only satisfaction is in working and serving God. This is the, what's it say, the conclusion of the matter. So this is Solomon's wisdom. He also wrote the Song of Solomon, or sometimes called the Song of Songs, which is a poetic drama of two lovers. So again, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. These are the wisdom books of Solomon. Now, Solomon later in his life, as he grows older, he gets very, very, very wealthy. He has a huge building program throughout the land. But he marries 700 wives and has 300 concubines. Now, don't ask how this happens, but this is what we're told about it.
Well, we know he's wealthy if he could do that.
Yeah.
Did you spend about roughly the same amount of time in Ecclesiastes as you did in Genesis?
No, we did not. We studied Ecclesiastes a couple years ago. Didn't spend as much time there studying that. It's only 12 chapters as opposed to Genesis of 50 chapters. But, you know, Solomon actually, with these 1,000 women, you know, he built temples for his wives' gods, that's right. They weren't all, they were foreign, a lot of the women were foreign. So they have different gods, not the one true God of Israel. And then he joins in their idolatrous worship. Larry, you have a question?
So I think a lot of these marriages were to increase his empire and have peace with his
Political
neighbors.
alliances, right.
Yeah.
We don't know a whole lot about all that. We know, big picture, that it wasn't a good thing.
No.
This is sort of how his life ends.
Do we know how many children he had?
Must have been thousands.
I don't think it says anywhere it talks about that.
But it had to have been a lot.
Yeah. Lots and lots and lots. Well, let me back up one moment. So again, like I said, he abandons God in his old age. Remember how he started out? Sounded really good, but life changed for him. He made some bad choices along the way. So the result of Solomon's sin is summarized fairly well in 1 Kings 11. A couple verses there say, Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, Since this has been your mind, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. Yet for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all of the kingdom, but I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of David my servant and for the sake of Jerusalem which I have chosen. So here's a prophecy to Solomon. You know, we've got David establishes the kingdom. Here comes Solomon, his son. Everything's going along fine. Solomon makes wrong choices, goes down the wrong paths. And then this prophecy comes up, says, that's it. God says, that's it. And then prophecy of 10 tribes torn from the house of David. It's for David's sake, but one tribe is left to the house of David. So the kingdom is divided. This kingdom that we had for all these years is now divided. Rehoboam is David's son, and Rehoboam was very foolish in some of his harshness about how he was going to handle the revolts in the land. Rehoboam actually listened to the counsel of his peers instead of listening to the counsel of his elders, which again is a good lesson, I think, for all of us. It's explained here in some of these books. So when he succeeds his father Solomon, so you've got Jeroboam and Rehoboam, okay? Jeroboam is going to go north. Rehoboam is staying in the south. Jeroboam takes 10 tribes in the north, and Paul, remember on his map, showed the land of Israel in the south, and he talked about Simeon way down south, and a little bit of Benjamin. So that's it's right behind you. Right here. Okay, thank you. You don't see it here? So Judah down here is what Rehoboam keeps. Jeroboam is going up here. Okay, so here's Israel, here's Judah. So this is what's happening. Again, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, as we're looking at that book. Larry, you got a question?
Yeah, Rehoboam is David's son,
That is correct.
and Jeroboam is
I'm sorry, Solomon's son.
Solomon's son, and Jeroboam is
He's a, what's he called, a mighty warrior of Solomon?
He was an administrator over like a provincial governor or something like that under Solomon.
He's called something.
Yeah, he's got a title.
Like,
But who was his father?
Jeroboam's father? It says Jeroboam, son of
Nebat.
Nebat. So, okay. And Paul again talked a little bit about this in his history and geography, but Jeroboam immediately has a crisis. So we've got a revolt. We've got the top, the north, the south, but Jerusalem is in the south, Rehoboam's area, Judah. But Judah says, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to get the people from going back down into Judah, back down into the southern area, back down to Jerusalem to worship? So what does he do? He sets up a church of convenience, really. I mean, he has the golden calves. He sets up a false priesthood.
I think I've been to that church.
Yeah, church of convenience, that's right. So he invents a priesthood, he makes up new feast days, and he basically says, you guys follow me and do this, and you don't have to worry about going back and worshiping God in the true way, because it'll all be okay this way. Well, that's not a good idea. The church of convenience is not a good idea. And to me, the lesson is the God of the Bible is very clear. There is a right way to worship. There is a right way to worship. And Jeroboam was trying to invent his own way. So, what happened with Jeroboam in the north, in Israel, is in spite of his efforts to stop this migration south, the faithful people that were in the north migrated back south to Judah and enlarged Judah at the expense of Israel. Okay? This led to war. So, this is not a good thing that's happening. Okay, let's move on. The kings of Israel. So we talked about Jeroboam and what was happening, but then there's different kings in Israel. And the summary of the northern kings in Israel is that, just a summary says, he walked in all the way of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and in his sin wherewith he made Israel to sin. So the summary of the northern kings is not a good summary. There was not one good king in the northern kingdom, in a spiritual sense. There were several that were capable leaders, but not a one of them spiritually was a good leader, a good king. Southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah. So we're back down south here again, which again incorporates Jerusalem at its north end. But the southern kingdom, all the leaders in the southern kingdom, all the kings descended from David. There was really just one dynasty. There were some good kings in the southern kingdom. There were some good kings in the southern kingdom, but there was a downward spiral. There was a downward spiral. They all trended downward spiritually. Okay, that's the overview overall of Jeroboam and Rehoboam and what's happening in this divided kingdom. We also want to talk about prophets as we're looking at the books of the Bible and this portion. Prophets had a major role during this time of the divided kingdom. Prophets had a major role. And why is that? Oops. In 2 Chronicles 36, the Lord, the God of their fathers, sent persistently to them by his messengers because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his words, and scoffing at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, until there was no remedy. So God kept sending the prophets, and the people aren't listening. So this is why the prophets. There are, on page 27, there are examples of the prophets, starting there at the bottom half of page 27. In the northern kingdom of Israel, some of the prophets, as you can see up on the screen, Elijah and Elisha, no books specifically about them, but books of Amos and book of Hosea. So these are all about prophets to the northern kingdom of Israel. Southern kingdom of Judah, Isaiah and Micah. So you've heard of these different books of the Bible. This is what we're looking at and who they were going to. Then other nations also. Jonah, the prophet Jonah and the prophet Nahum went to Nineveh in particular. Let me find myself in my notes here. I got sidetracked in a moment. Okay, let's move on and look at Isaiah for a moment, because Isaiah is the longest book in the Bible. Brian, you have a question?
I'm not seeing that on page 27.
Bottom half, well, it doesn't have that, but you've got Amos. It starts here, and that's where the prophets are starting. So then if you turn over Jonah, Hosea, Isaiah, so on. Okay? Yes, not lined up somewhere.
Yeah, they're listed in the book in chronological order. The best take we have available to us. And on the screen they're organized by where they worked instead of chronological. So I apologize for that, but they're in a different order there.
Remember when we talked a few weeks about how sometimes the Bible's hard to understand? It's hard to figure out who's going where and when and how and why, and this part is harder to understand, but the notebook is very, very clear. If you follow it through and look at it and relook at it and look at it again, it starts to sink in. But again, what we're looking at tonight is really just an overview, so it gives you an idea and you say, wait a minute, what? And then you go back and you look at it again, and again, and again. Let's look at Isaiah for a moment. Isaiah, like I said, is the longest book in the Bible except for the Psalms. It's the second longest book in the entire Bible, and it's the longest book of prophecy. So this is very important about Isaiah. Isaiah actually spans several kings, and before, during, and after the captivity of Israel. So remember Israel, captivity by the Assyrians. So this is Isaiah's time that he's prophesying. Besides prophecy in the book of Isaiah, there's also a lot of historical chapters that give more information about King Ahaz and King Hezekiah, and who were King Hezekiah of Judah. So again, you get prophecy in there, you get some more history in there as well. A lot of information in there. The other beautiful thing about the book of Isaiah is the visions of the future kingdom of God. Really some very, very wonderful chapters in there, giving details of the kingdom of God, which is to fill the earth. Alright, you have a question?
I heard you said Ahaz, and Paul, you mentioned it's Ahaz.
I may have.
You can say it either
I may
way.
have sometimes said that.
Okay.
You can say it either way.
Might be closer.
Okay, 'cause, yeah, I was mentioning to you there's like like Ahab and Ahaz, and you mentioned it's pronounced Ahaz.
No. Pronunciations, we're speaking in English, so
Yeah.
you know, it makes it a challenge when we're trying to pronounce Hebrew names or ancient names. Also, in the book of Isaiah, we've got warnings about God's judgments that are coming on Judah, not just on Israel. And then also, the book of Isaiah, the prophet foretells the downfall of Assyria. So that's the book of Isaiah, what's happening there. The prophecies, the prophets that we're talking about in this time period, God uses other nations to punish Israel and Judah. Assyria, we talked about Assyria, and that's mentioned in the prophecies. Assyria removed Israel. They took the people to other lands. Paul mentioned, remember he said he took them out of the land, and then they allowed foreign people to come in. So Paul spoke about the Samaritans. This is how the Samaritans got into the land of Israel. So the prophets speak about those things as well. People are actually imported into the land. So again, it's summarized in Isaiah and some of the other prophets. So this period of time ends. Israel, the northern kingdom, is gone forever. The Assyrians have taken them into captivity. So they've imported other people, like I just said, the Samaritans. So there's a mixed people in the north, in Israel. Hezekiah, who we just spoke about, one of the best kings in history, is a king in Judah. And Judah during this time, as it says on the screen, Judah is impoverished but independent. So they've had a rough way to go of it as well. But they are still an independent nation. Speaking of, looking at their spiritual trends, Hezekiah, again, he's a wonderful king spiritually, but there's a lot of other problems that are out there to these territories. So these books that we've talked about cover all this information. There's a lot of stuff there. So like I said, I would suggest get your notebook, take it home, go over it all, and I think you'll have a lot of questions, which is good. Just keep questioning, keep asking, and keep looking.
So Ray touched on 13 books,
Oh my
so that's a bunch of stuff.
Sure is.
Obviously, we could only, highlight a few things out of these, right? But we're trying to give you the structure overall, how the things go together. And as Ray said repeatedly, the book is available as a reference. So hopefully, this whole class is, how do I start reading the Bible? Well, we think it helps a lot to have a mental picture of the thing overall. That's what we're trying to give you. And then a little bit of detail. So it's like you're reading through and you get to 1 Chronicles, which, by the way, has a whole lot of names in the first 9 chapters. It makes tough going. But then you can turn to this section in your notebook and kind of fit together what's going on here. So there are prophets that fit into this time period. So what are they? Well, when you start reading Nahum, you could, like, who? Nahum? I don't know anything about Nahum. Well, we can give you a little bit about it. You get to Micah, you get to, whatever it is, Hosea. That's what we're aiming for in this class. So I don't actually apologize for throwing a whole lot of stuff at you. It's what we intended to do. But we want to give you the resources to actually use this information instead of it just all going away, and that's my hope. All right, well, we're going to move on to our next great theme, which is morality. And this is page 32, is where we're up to in the notebook. Every religion, every philosophy has something to say about right and wrong. Right? That's why religions exist. That's why philosophies exist. They talk about right and wrong. So morality if you're going to consider any sort of religion, and we are considering the Christian Bible, what does the Christian Bible say about moral standards? It's one of the key things that any religion has to address. And the Bible actually contains two great bodies of moral teaching. So first of all, there's the Law of Moses, and then there is the teaching of Jesus and his apostles. It's a mistake to think of these as separate or in contrast with each other, because the second builds upon the first, as we're going to see. We're going to take a look at the moral standards under the Law of Moses. And of course, what people think of first is the Ten Commandments, right? Everybody, you think of the Law of Moses, moral teaching, Ten Commandments. Well, that's true. Here. That's true, but it's not complete. There's more moral teaching in the Law of Moses than just the Ten Commandments. So the Ten Commandments are recorded twice, actually, but one of them is in Exodus 20. The reference is there, and it's also mentioned in your notebook. We're just going to very briefly recap, what do the Ten Commandments say? Maybe you can recite these from memory. I don't know if you had to learn that, but anyway, we're going to do a quick overview. So first commandment is there should be no other gods. You shall have no other gods before me or besides me. Before me means like in front of me. It doesn't mean it's okay to have another god just as long as I'm first. That's not what it means. It means no gods besides me. Second commandment is no idols. You don't make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. And in some cases, you can see the ... I have condensed the text a little bit by, just to get it into shorter form. Third commandment, don't inappropriately invoke God's name. So you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. This actually does not refer to cursing, the way most people would often think that that's what this applies to. What it applies to is you don't swear an oath by God and then not do it. That's taking the Lord's name in vain. So you don't say, I swear by Yahweh, the God of Israel, that I will do this, and then you don't do this. That's taking the Lord's name in vain. By extension, you take the Lord's name if you commit to being one of his people. And then, of course, if you fail to follow his standards, then you have taken his name in vain. Fourth commandment, keep the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And then there's a fair bit of detail recorded in Exodus 20 in support of that. This is the only one of the 10 commandments that is not supported in the New Testament. So all the other 9 find support in the New Testament. This one does not. Fifth commandment is to honor your father and your mother. Sixth is you shall not murder. Some versions have you shall not kill. Probably kill, it's more generic than just what we would call murder. So kill might be a better translation. We're using the English Standard Version, which is our handout version, for all the passages that we put on the screen. Just so you know where that's coming from. Seventh commandment is you shall not commit adultery. 8, you shall not steal. 9, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. So you don't slander, you don't testify falsely about somebody. And the 10th one is no coveting. Where the dots are, the ... there, it says you shall not covet your neighbor's wife or donkey or, but the bottom line is, it concludes by saying you shall not covet anything that is your neighbor's. Nothing. So coveting means to desire. Okay? It doesn't mean you want to take it away. It means you just want it. You know, so it's the desire itself. This is the one that the Apostle Paul hones in on as the one that was the toughest one for him to keep. He said, I kept the whole law, and then I got down to you shall not covet, and I did all kinds of coveting. You know, because it's the internal thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, you think, well, what's wrong with thinking, well, I wish I was making as much money as so-and-so, or I wish I had as nice a house as so-and-so. That's coveting.
That's
right?
coveting. That's exactly right. And it is both an Old Testament and especially a New Testament teaching that it just, where does that go? Where does that thinking go in your mind, you know? It doesn't go to a spiritual place. It goes to this life, material things.
So we could say that it's Satan that, once we think of it in our mind, then he sets out to
It
destroy us.
It comes from inside.
And,
Yeah.
just,
Let's move on.
okay.
Because beyond the Ten Commandments, we have actually quite a bit. There's very detailed instructions about the worship services, the tabernacle, sacrifices, all of that kind of thing. There is a civil law governing things like debts and land transfers and all the things that a civil law has to cover. And there's a criminal law. And in those details of the law, there are several themes that arise that relate to conduct, that relate to behavior, what we would call morality, right and wrong. And so picking out these themes. So as you're reading through the law, most people that I've talked to find that kind of dry, right? But there's stuff in there that really matters to our moral behavior. So let's look at some examples of those things. One of them is, you got to take care of your neighbor. Let's look up, if you wouldn't mind, looking up with me, Leviticus chapter 19. Okay, we warned you the first night that we were going to make you open your Bibles once in a while. So Leviticus is the third book of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. If you need to use the table of contents in the front of your Bible, by all means do that.
What chapter?
Leviticus chapter 19.
It's up there on the board.
There it is.
It's written down.
Yeah, that too.
I actually borrowed your Bible.
I didn't know you picked mine up. I didn't know if you did it.
Yeah, mine, I failed to get it out of the case, so. So Leviticus 19, and we'll start at verse 13. So this Leviticus is very frequently cited as the most boring, hard-to-read book in the Bible.
I don't know if I've ever read it.
Okay, and maybe you've never read it. But I just want to pick this piece out of Leviticus because just to illustrate how important stuff is in the law. Okay, so Leviticus 19, verse 13, you shall not oppress your neighbor, nor rob him. The wages of a hired man are not to remain with you all night until morning. So you can't defraud your employees, right? You shall not curse a deaf man, nor place a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall revere your God. I am the Lord. So you just don't be cruel to people, right? You shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor defer to the great. Now, doesn't it strike you that in the legal justice system that you see wherever it is, our country or any other country, one or the other of those extremes happens, right? There's favoritism to the poor because they're poor, or there's favoritism to the rich because they are powerful, right? And the law says you don't do either of those things. You've got to be absolutely just. You are to judge your neighbor fairly, the end of verse 15. 16, you shall not go about as a slanderer among your people, and you are not to act against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. You shall not hate your fellow countrymen in your heart. Okay, this is getting internal, right? This is not just the externals. You shall not hate your fellow countrymen in your heart. You may surely reprove your neighbor, but you shall not incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Did you think that that came from the New Testament? Well, it does. It's quoted, but it originates in Leviticus. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Let's call it quits there. So the law even extends to your enemy, which Jesus also picks up in the New Testament. So from Exodus 23, if you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. Right? You can't, just because he's your enemy doesn't mean you don't do the right thing. And it says, if you see the donkey of one who hates you, so here's somebody that hates me, his donkey is lying down under its burden. He has collapsed under the burden. You shall refrain from leaving him with it. You shall rescue it with him. Right? You go to work side by side with your enemy to rescue your enemy's donkey. Doesn't this sound New Testament? This is from the law of Moses. God's standards haven't changed, is what basically we're discovering here. Well, there's another key theme to mention, and that is the rule of law. This is just something to kind of watch for as you're reading. Uncompromising fairness. We looked at the, everybody's equal before the law, rich and poor alike, all equal before the law. Also, there's a lot of laws about that against corruption, right? You don't take a bribe, you don't give a bribe. No corruption at all was tolerable. No favoritism was tolerable. And just to mention very briefly the real meaning of an eye for an eye. You've heard that phrase, right? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It's like that's kind of the ultimate description of vengeance, right? You're going to get him back. But I'll tell you what this was about, actually. This was about you don't take more than what you got, right? So justice, it does not mean punishing the offender more than the offense, the original offense was. It's a ceiling, it's not a floor, right? You don't give at least an eye for an eye. You give at most an eye for an eye. And less than that is permitted. Remember, in the passage in Leviticus we looked up, it said, you shall not take vengeance. Right? So retribution has a ceiling. And you are permitted to do less than that. That's the real meaning of the eye for an eye. There's also quite a bit, you'll discover in the law, about sexual conduct. And it boils down to sexual relationships belong only within marriage, period. Full stop. That's it. And another interesting thing is that exploitation of women was absolutely forbidden. When you think about the time in which this was promoted, this law was promoted, it has taken centuries, millennia since then, for cultures to get to the point where they do not permit the exploitation of women. They do not permit the abuse of women. Women are not disposable, and abuse is not tolerated under the law of Moses. This is going back a long, long way. Very right, and we recognize that as right. Okay, let's move to the New Testament, the Bible's other great body of moral teaching. And when you think about the moral teaching of Jesus, what do you think of? The Golden Rule, right? That's and that's right. But once again, there's more. This isn't the only thing. So the Golden Rule is recorded in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7. It's on the screen. Whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. And note the difference now. This is now a principle. This is not rules, right? So under the law you have rules. Don't steal. Don't murder. Jesus states a principle that covers all of that. Whatever you would want somebody to do to you, you do that. You behave that way. So it's a principle that can apply in all cases, right? If you've got a set of rules, you will always find a loophole. Jesus gives us no loophole. But as we saw, this teaching really comes from the law. This love your neighbor as yourself. And Paul picks up on this. Romans 13:10, he says, love is the fulfilling of the law. So the morality of Jesus fulfills the law intentionally. It is not an accident that this happens. Jesus builds his moral teaching on the law, and he makes it into principles. And he gets more specific than just the general golden rule. For instance, once again in the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about if you have lust, it's the same thing as adultery, right? The external action, refraining from the external action isn't sufficient. You have to internalize. You have to not lust. Similarly, if you hate your brother, you're a murderer. Well, I didn't kill him. No, but you would have loved to have seen him die. Right? You are just as guilty as the person that commits murder. That's the New Testament morality. It brings it inside. So the principles taught by Jesus and the apostles go deeper. It's the heart that counts. And this is where the apostolic teaching comes from that we read about. No malice. Right? You can't have ill will towards someone. You can't covet. Once again, that is emphasized. You can't gossip. It's the principles of the law brought inside instead of just in the external behavior. Well, like the law, some themes keep coming up over and over. So one of them is no self-defense, no retaliation. So here's an example. We're going to look at two examples. First from Jesus, once again, the Sermon on the Mount. You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. We looked at that, right? Or talked about it anyway. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Right? So don't take any retaliatory action. You don't have to go up to the ceiling. You can do zero. And that's what Jesus says is the right thing to do. You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Of course, the law didn't say hate your enemy. The law, but the interpretation was, you love your neighbor, but that's okay to hate your enemy, right? It's an interpretation. Jesus says no. He says, I say to you, love your enemies. And actually, that's, as we saw, reflected in the law. Paul in Romans 12, repay no one evil for evil. Never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Another recurring theme is generosity. Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount, give to the one who begs from you. You don't pass by a beggar. You give to the beggar. Acts 20.
So what do you give them? Money?
You give them what you can. And if you can
Well,
be
if they
more
give them
helpful
money,
than
they're
money,
not gonna really do the right thing with that money.
you don't know that, right?
Well-
But Jesus says it very flat. He doesn't make any exceptions or conditions, nothing. He just says, give to the one who begs from you. Now, I would say
I've offered
there are things more valuable than money that you can give.
to buy people lunches or breakfast,
Yeah, sure.
and they won't take that.
Yeah, so, okay. You know, if they won't
So-
take, if they won't take what you're giving, that's on them.
And so be it.
Yeah, but we're not to be the judge. That's that's gonna be another one of the themes that we look at here. So we don't like this teaching, right? Jesus's teaching is hard. We don't like it. We want to find ways around it. This resulted in Jesus being executed, right? For this very reason. People don't like the teachings of Jesus. From Acts 20, we must help the weak and remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And from 2 Corinthians 9, each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. We can't do it out of duty. That doesn't work. The heart has to be touched. That's what we hear from Jesus and the apostles over and over again. And then the one that I was just mentioning, talking to Brian, forgive and don't judge and be kind. I've kind of lumped those things together. From Luke chapter 6, Jesus saying, judge not and you will not be judged. Condemn not and you will not be condemned. Forgive and you will be forgiven. It's very, very plain, and he repeats that on more than one occasion. But from Colossians chapter 3, same kind of thought. Put on then compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, patience, bearing with one another. And if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other. As the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. We don't like this teaching. It's hard. So, this is the standard that Jesus and the apostles hold up. And as you are reading through the New Testament, I urge you to look for this kind of material. You will find it pervading the New Testament. This descriptions in various words and various ways about the moral standards of the Lord Jesus. Well, it's recognized that the morality, most of Western culture is based on the moral standards taught by Jesus and the apostles. It isn't very overt anymore. It isn't very direct. But the foundation of Western culture, which is what we all grew up in, is based on the standards of Christianity. Now, that doesn't mean that people practice it, right? But the theory is that we're supposed to have a just, equitable, kind, generous society. Okay? I think you could argue that that doesn't happen. But that's the Western ideals, right? That's the standards that Western culture has. So our cultural notions of fairness and justice come out of the Bible. Other cultures that don't have a Bible foundation have different standards. And the notions of fairness and justice that we have don't appear in those cultures. Now, you might say they don't get practiced in ours either, but at least lip service is given to them, right, in our culture.
Do you think that the reason that consensus of moral values seems to be less today is a result of people not being religious,
not using a Bible basis? Absolutely. It used to be that judges from the bench and legislators in session would quote the Bible and as reason for what they were saying, what they were doing. Doesn't happen anymore. And so we are becoming a more diverse culture with a great mixture of different kinds of standards, and yeah, that causes conflict. There is nothing that people will fight about more tenaciously than their values, and that's what we're talking about here. So different sets of values. Well, we could say a whole lot more about this. There are whole college courses you can take. There are degree programs in this kind of topic. So, it's just way beyond what we can do. But the bottom line is that right and wrong have to be addressed by every religion or philosophy. And the Bible standards really are very clear. They're not ambiguous. We saw some examples. Old Testament morality was mostly about overt behavior, external behavior, although as we saw, there are some clues that, this has to be internalized. Christianity builds on that and brings it in very much internal. And it's very demanding. A lot is expected of those who claim allegiance to Jesus. Ray.
This next section is probably one of the shortest sections that we're going to have, but it's a very, very, very important section. Paul and some of the things that he just talked about, he talked about things that were from the Old Testament and quoted in the New Testament. Well, when those New Testament people heard Jesus quoting something, their mind immediately went back to the Old Testament. Should have. And that's the Bible reading tip for tonight. It's about listening for echoes. What does this remind me of? And, doing that, tell yourself, Bible echoes, Bible echoes, Bible echoes. So every time you sit down and read your Bible, think, okay, does this remind me of anything that I've read in the past? We've got I've got it in my Bible here, we've got a Bible reading plan. And this one in particular takes you through 3 different sections. Old Testament, New Testament. But it's amazing when you read the 3 different sections, and it wasn't created to specifically line up certain chapters, but it's amazing when you read through some of these days, and you read something in Psalms, all of a sudden you hear an echo back to Genesis, and you're like, oh wow, look at how that all fit together. But you got to know your Bible in order to understand the echoes. But the echoes, the one example we're going to show you tonight is an example that Jesus was using. But before we do that, think about these Bible echoes. That we've got these 66 books. We've got a lot of different authors. Authors typically today will build off of what's gone in the past. If you just think about a series of books that's a trilogy or 5 books or 10 books or whatever. Well, if you just jump in at one place, you're not going to know what happened earlier on. That's a minor example of what I'm talking about with Bible echoes, because we've got different authors years and years, hundreds, thousands of years apart, and yet it all connects because of the Bible echoes, because God's inspiring the whole thing. But there are those quotations that are there and allusions to the past that we can listen for it all the time. So, in your notebook on page, 35. So instead of looking it up in your own Bible, you can actually look at page 35. Here's the verse that I want to use as an example tonight. Mark 12. Let me read this to you. And they sent to him some of the Pharisees, so this is Jesus, and they sent to him some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians to trap him in his talk. And they came and said to him, Teacher, we know that you are true and do not care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not? But, knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, Why put me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me look at it. And they brought one, and he said to them, Whose likeness and inscription is this? And they said to him, Caesar's. Jesus said to them, Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at him. They were trying to trap him. They were trying to trap him and figure a way so his answer was going to upset somebody. But it said at the end they marveled, or they were amazed at him. His response is very clear. Of course, yes, you pay taxes. But you're going to give to Caesar the things that are Caesar. You're giving to a government, even if that government may not be righteous. But that's where you have to pay your taxes to. So he made them, I believe, he made them hear an echo. He made them hear an echo and took them back to the very roots of their faith. All the way back to Genesis 1. So, Genesis 1 says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So, whose likeness and inscription, whose image is it that men bear? God's. So, Jesus is saying to them very clearly, you need to give yourself to God. You need to dedicate yourself. You need to give all of yourself. And that's the image that we bear. So it's not just about paying taxes. The verse in Mark isn't just about paying taxes. The verse in Mark is also about rendering to God, give him his due. Giving him us by reflecting his image and his character correctly. Jesus' enemies weren't doing this. Let me give you one other, it's not in the book, let me give you one other echo that I love this echo, and it's not nearly as far apart. It's in John 18 and John 21. And that is, remember Peter denied Christ 3 times, right? So we know the story. Peter denied Christ 3 times. During that denial, it says at one point he was warming himself by a charcoal fire. 3 chapters later, in John 21, when Peter's in the boat fishing and they see Jesus up on the beach, and Peter jumps out of the boat and goes to Jesus, and then they eat together on the beach. At that point, it also says that there was a charcoal fire. That's what they were cooking over. Now, first off, that's only 2 times the word charcoal is used. So I think the second time in John 21, echoing back to a very short time earlier, and that smell that Peter smelled, that charcoal fire, all of a sudden here he is on the beach and he's thinking back, this echo in his own mind, thinking back, what just happened recently? I denied Christ 3 times. But then, even more beautiful, what does Jesus do in John 21? 3 times he says, Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? Now he's using different Greek words there, we're not going to go into that. But 3 denials, 3 times do you love me? Charcoal fire, charcoal fire. I think Peter was using this principle in his life, that unknowingly, echoing back to what had just happened. So again, that's not in your own book, but that's one of my favorite, very short-term echoes. This is a very long-term echo here. Anyway, to finish up this section, you're not going to catch all the echoes the first time. You're just not. Now, if you do, great, but there's just very, very deep in some of these echoes. But you will only catch those echoes anytime if you're listening for them. So that's why I said earlier, Bible echoes, Bible echoes, Bible echoes. When you're reading, always think in your mind, what does that remind me of? And if you listen for it, many times you'll hear it. That's all for this section. Oh, hi Larry.
I guess you should explain what you mean by echoes, both forward and backward.
Yeah, I mean, really, the echo is just, what does this allude to one way or the other? I mean, in our class last night, we were talking about Exodus and how Moses echoes forward to Jesus. Or if we're reading about Jesus, we can hear that echo back to Moses or back to Joseph, especially, which we've just done Genesis. So, a lot of times when we're looking at Moses or Joseph, those are types of Christ, but they are alluding to something in the future. So yeah, you're right, Larry, the echoes go both ways. So, okay?
We actually had, and we're going to wrap up right now. We had one more section that we actually planned to do tonight, but as I was saying to Ray, I don't think we're going to make it, and we're not. So we will see how things go as we go through the remaining 3 weeks of the class. There may be something that we have to leave for your own consideration.
Or just
we'll
go
see how that goes.
Or just go an extra week.
Or we can go an extra week, but we didn't ask people to sign up for that. So, so we'll see how it goes. But just to tie into what Ray closed out with in response to Larry's question, we saw an example, I think, of that. I mean, how many of you have heard before, you shall love your neighbor as yourself? Probably everybody, right? How many would have said, that comes out of the New Testament, that's teaching of Jesus, right? But as we saw, so it's like, okay, you've got that in your mind, right? That's already in your mind. But now you decide, I'm going to read the whole Bible. I've never read the Old Testament. I'm going to start in Genesis and read my way through. So you're reading your way through. You get into Leviticus, tough going. All these sacrifices, all this cleanness and uncleanness. And right there in the middle of that stuff, you shall love your neighbors yourself. Right? You caught the echo. Right? When we read Leviticus, you caught that echo. I'm confident. So that's kind of the forward kind. It's you know what comes later, but now in the Old Testament you see where it came from. Well, the other thing that can happen is you read through the Old Testament, you get some of that information in your mind, and now as you're reading the New Testament, you start seeing stuff that you never saw before. It's like, wow, that came out of Genesis. That Ray was talking about. That all of the stuff that comes out of Genesis. There's a ton, and Exodus too, but especially Genesis. You start seeing that when you're reading the New Testament. You start seeing all those linkages. So I absolutely agree with what Ray said. That this is just probably one of the most valuable little things that we can pass on to you. Is this thing for Echoes. All right, let's wrap up. We'll have a prayer. I think we have some cookies and looks like some candy. It looks like blueberries, chocolate-covered blueberries. And obviously we can have some conversation as we go. Let's pray.